Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Blockcast with Simon and Will. Will, how are you today, mate?
Hey Simon, glad to be here. What's today's topic?
Well, today we are definitely going to be talking about the ZK Sync. So Will, what can you tell us about that?
Exciting indeed. It's got all the nerds, the geeks, the dorks, the geniuses, and the investors really excited. It's a ZK rollup on layer 2 that is EVM compatible. In a nutshell, that means you can easily port all of the apps on Ethereum and move them into the layer 2 really quick, really easy.
So why would you want to do that? Why would someone want to be able to port really quick and easily from the mainnet to the ZK Sync?
Well, so that's the thing about ZK layer 2s. You've got two types of layer 2s. You've got optimistic rollups, and the advantage of optimistic rollups is that you can easily port any kind of app on Ethereum onto the rollup and just use it easily, and you can transfer all that liquidity really easily. The disadvantage of optimistic rollups is that when you want to bring your tokens back into Ethereum, it takes a really long time just because of the way they work. So how ZK people figured it out was, well, we're going to make it really quick to move your tokens from the layer 2 to layer 1 using zero knowledge proofs, and that's why they're called ZK rollups. The problem with that solution is that it became insanely hard to build fully fledged apps on top of a ZK layer 2. And so now what ZK Era has done is they've made it easy to build EVM apps on their layer 2. And that means you have an Ethereum app on layer 2 that is cheap, it's fast, and when you want to bring your tokens back to Ethereum, it's also quick and cheap.
Yeah, and that's a huge point of difference between like your Arbitrum and your Optimisms, which are the optimistic rollups, is that ability to go back to the mainnet really quickly. I think Arbitrum, it's like 7 days.
And now, this is the next thing. You've got ZK rollups on a layer 2 that are fast, and you can withdraw your tokens easily, and you can run Ethereum apps. And the thing is, this is only the first stage. So right now, I think once ZK Era is a bit more mature, you'll get 2,000 transactions per second, which is pretty nice, a lot faster than Ethereum. But then that's not all. What they're working on right now is the whole concept of hyperscaling. I think a more appropriate term for it is an app chain, or in other words, a layer 3. So you've got your Ethereum on the layer 1, and then you've got ZK Era on a layer 2. And then on top of that, if you're building an app or a group of apps that you own, you can create your own little chain on top of ZK Era. And that's what they're calling hyperscaling. That means all of the resources on your own chain are yours to manage. You can decide what kind of nodes you have, how many nodes you have, how powerful they are, how much memory they have, how decentralized you want it to be. That's all up to you on your own, sort of personalized hyperscale chain. And then once the transactions are completed on that chain, they're rolled up and they move down to ZK Era. ZK Era makes sure everything is good, kosher, and then it passes them down to Ethereum for basically the security guarantee.
Yeah, and I think the really important thing to discuss here, because we are talking about obviously optimistic rollups versus the ZK Sync, is that we're talking here that the hyperscalability of ZK Sync in a kind of way makes it, going towards infinite amount of transactions per second you can actually have. Whereas the optimistic rollups do actually have a kind of cap on them at some point in time. And you mentioned there that ZK Sync can do 2,000 transactions per second. Pretty sure Arbitrum is pretty much doing the same thing as that, but they talk about Arbitrum only scaling up to about 50, 60,000 transactions per second. But let's not be, kidding ourselves here. At the moment, going to 50,000 transactions per second would be, ridiculous. That's kind of what the Visa and MasterCard network kind of do. I don't think even they get up to that many transactions per second on their network. So if you're getting to that kind of scalability, we're hitting everything that we currently know that we can do with technology.
Then you can get into games and, even social networks. In our last show, we were talking about social networks, and the challenge that we currently have on building them on the blockchain is that it's pretty expensive and it's also pretty slow. Now with blockchains like ZK Era, transactions are faster, cheaper, and hyperscaling isn't even the end of it. They actually have something called ZK Porter in the works, where they will move, I would say, part of the calculations down on the blockchain. They will move it off-chain. It's what you call data availability. So it's a little bit technical in exactly how they do that. But then, so that specific iteration of ZK Era will be a little bit different, a little bit less secure, but much faster. And I think estimates put it at something to the order of 20,000 transactions per second. Now that's Visa level. And the thing is, they're going to make it so that you as a developer can decide what you want to use. You can either use ZK Era, which is pretty strong, pretty secure, pretty fast, or you can also use ZK Era, which is extremely fast, maybe not as secure, but then your app might not need those security guarantees, and they're going to make both of those chains interoperable through bridges and things like that. So then leave it up to the developer to figure out exactly what and how they're going to build anything that they build.
Yeah, it's definitely playing into this theme of the layer 2 wars that are now occurring. You know, last bull market was the layer 1 wars, and people are definitely talking about layer 2 wars at the moment. And from what I understand, you know, the technology between the ZK is just better than optimistic, but it took them longer to bring it to the mainnet. And so we're seeing right now that Optimism and Arbitrum have kind of got the head start, and they've got, you know, a significant amount of, you know, TVL, the total value lockup in them. They've got a lot of applications on them, and they've got the network effect, I guess. That's kind of a big point of difference. And now we're seeing, okay, we've got something that's a bit better, but starting later. Can it, you know, run down Arbitrum? Will it actually steal the volume, steal the transactions, steal the locked up value from Arbitrum? So I'm very interested to see what is going to occur here. Theoretically, ZK should swallow all the volume or the lunch of the optimistic rollups, because if you can copy and paste it across, you think people would do that. If it's a better version, people will do that. But that's not necessarily how human psychology and humans work in general.
They don't just do the calculation. Sometimes humans can be insanely lazy. And so if something is good enough, they're not exactly going to go for the great one. So ZK Sync is amazing. It's great. I think it's better than optimistic rollups. But then the question is, will it be significantly cheaper enough? And will they have enough motivations to get developers to move from Optimism into ZK Sync? I guess that's a big question, to agree with you.
Is there any use case where optimistic rollups would be better than ZK Sync?
I personally don't see any specific use case, since really EVM apps would work pretty well on both of them. So then the question really is, I suppose it comes down to the user. How quickly do they want to withdraw their tokens? And if ZK Sync makes it significantly cheap enough, then you might actually get some unique things, like maybe games coming on there, or maybe NFT projects perhaps, because sometimes it's really expensive to mint them on Ethereum. So, but the NFT would need to be significantly cheaper to mint on ZK Sync than Optimism. So you'd really need to come up with an application that requires speed and cost that cannot be built on Optimism in order for it to move from all of that liquidity, all that TVL, and in order for it to move to ZK Sync.
Yeah, sure. It's a tough one. And maybe we don't know yet what developers will find out as they go through this innovative process of building and learning on these different rollups and different layer 2 solutions. Let's have a quick talk about who's behind ZK Sync, though, because they actually have some pretty good pedigree. So who's behind ZK Sync?
Matter Labs, and they've been working on this technology since 2018. They've been supported by Ethereum grants. I know BitDAO invested in them as well. And they initially started very humble with just a layer 2 that worked with a simple ZK Sync rollup where you could just only trade tokens. And I guess they've been studying this technology for a while, which is why we're seeing ZK Sync come out.
Yeah, and they're certainly not lacking money. I think they've raised something like $500 million just about to help fund the project. So they're not short on money, which is why they've had the ability to develop this fairly quickly. Like, a lot of people didn't think that this ZK technology could be done so quickly. They thought it was still years away. But the only thing I have against the team in general is that they are not crypto native per se. This is their first kind of foray into it. So they're a bunch of software engineers for sure, and they probably do know what they're doing because they've got the backing for it. But this is the first foray into it, and geez, they're diving right into the deep end, building this ZK technology.
That's pretty interesting. I actually didn't know that, Simon, but I did listen to them on an interview, and they said that they wanted to be extremely careful. And they said to developers, do not move all of your TVL at one go. Make sure you're moving it in slowly. They're encouraging developers to have limits. And typically projects like this also have bounties, in that they do want white hat hackers or developers or anybody who can break the system to come in and try to break it, expose vulnerabilities. And like you mentioned, since they have quite a bit of money, I'm pretty sure they would probably have bounties out there, but they're being very careful. It's totally a new system. Who knows how it could go. It hasn't been battle tested yet. And like you said, they're not Web3 native, so that's definitely an interesting space to watch.
Yeah, well, they're probably crypto native in the fact that they've been around in the space long enough, but this is their first venture or first product delivered, but it's a big product. And I would also say that when they sit there and say that they're telling people and encouraging people, and I've heard a fair few interviews from the CEO as well, talking about, put a small amount in, only dabble with it at first until we've had a bit of time behind us. I think that's, I guess, the smart thing that he should be saying. I think behind the scenes, they've got a fairly large amount of confidence.
I definitely wouldn't put my $1 million in it if I had it, but I would definitely put a little bit just to test.
Yeah, so let's jump into that element of it, because we had our talk about Arbitrum a few weeks ago, and then Arbitrum did release its token. It was airdropped to early users and early adopters of the system. So token-wise for ZK Sync era, there is no token yet, and I have heard that they are saying that the token will come when it's needed, not any timeline put on it, but that means there is an airdrop coming. Is this valuable to get into? What are your thoughts on that?
I would definitely try to play around with ZK era, at least just for my own education and to understand it a little bit more. But then also more interesting is that I would say this could be one of those potential airdrops. When it does happen, it could be 6 months down the line, could be a year down the line. I remember when Uniswap airdrop dropped, a lot of people made quite a bit of money just for using Uniswap. So I would encourage everyone to go out there and try it. The bridging is really smooth. It's really easy. I don't know what you thought about it, Simon, but I found it really straightforward to do.
If you've played around on any of the layer 2s, then it's going to be a very similar experience. So the thing that I very much so noted was that I didn't feel like I was doing anything different to being on Arbitrum or Optimism, really, because it's still connected through MetaMask. It was still DeFi applications on there. They were all doing the same things. At the moment, all I was seeing was Me Too's. I guess I was wanting, but maybe I'm just too eager and too early to see something that ZK was doing that nothing else is doing, but maybe it's just too early for that kind of functionality to be there. But yeah, I played around. I provided some liquidity. I did some swaps, everything that you can do on the other layer 2s. But that is, I guess, the elements that they look at when they give you potential future airdrops is how much money have you used in the system, and I'd recommend using very little when you're doing this, but how active you are being on them. So if you're doing multiple transactions, if you're using multiple different applications, all these kind of things get factored into airdrops these days. And as you said, it's probably a lot longer than 6 months away. It's probably at least 12 months away, because I think Arbitrum was basically a year from when they first went to mainnet before the airdrop. Optimism was a little bit faster than that. I think Optimism was more about 6 months, but I think ZK Sync is definitely going to be at least 12 months away. So get on there and use it for sure. Play around with it, because if you haven't played around on layer 2s in general, you may as well play around on the one that might potentially give you an airdrop in the future. If it becomes a dominant layer 2, then that airdrop and then that token, when it becomes available, is potentially a good investment.
Oh yeah, it could be big. I mean, in the future, Ethereum might mainly be for security guarantees, right? And then most apps will probably run on layer 2s because they're cheaper and faster.
I guess the other thing I'd want to talk about is, as far as ZK technologies, is that ZK Sync is not the only zero knowledge protocol being put out there. There are competitors coming out there. I'm pretty sure before we even recorded this is that the Polygon zero knowledge EVM has launched on mainnet. So is that another competitor? Like, are we going to see not only a layer 2 wall, but a zero knowledge wall?
That's the thing, because the code is open source, which is great, and I think it's great that they did that. And I guess it's because they've already got all of the funding they need, and I'm not sure exactly what their business case is. What's to stop Polygon or somebody else doing a Me Too product with just a little bit of a difference, maybe just a little bit better marketing? I mean, it's almost like how the AI war has happened. It's no holds barred. It's almost like you just said, the ZK war is starting. And, who's going to come out on top? Are we going to have a lot of Me Too ZK eras, or, what's it going to look like? in a couple of months.
Absolutely. And here's my kind of, I guess, thought process for the future is that we were at a point where Ethereum wasn't scaling enough. It simply wasn't scaling enough. And that probably prohibited it, especially in the last bull market. Now we've got layer 2s on board. Layer 2s are firing up, and layer 2s are starting to bring huge amounts of transactions, bringing fees right down. And they've got future ideas of how to scale even more, bring price even further down. We are now at a point where we've got the railroads in place. Now we need someone come and build something on it. Someone needs to come along and do something on these rail networks that actually uses the technology. And I don't think we've really seen that yet. I think the first hint of it that I've seen is the decentralized derivative platforms, doing something that the big centralized exchanges can only do before. That's the first thing I've seen where the layer 2 technology is going, no, I can do it as good as you. I'd like to see more of that. I'd like to see more people building an application that uses this huge amount of transactions per second, these lower fees. I want to see that.
Oh yeah, that's also what I want to see. I think it would be really exciting. And I like what you said, that you're not sure about the investment case for layer 2s, but then the investment case for projects that build on layer 2 could be pretty interesting, depending on what comes out. Like you said, exchanges, here's a Binance for you, except it's on the blockchain and you don't have to trust anybody. It's right there. Look at the code yourself. You know, that's exciting.
And it's gaming. Gaming seems to be the next one that seems to be saying, hey, I am going to use these transactions per second and put it into a good game. There's got to be more.
Yeah, I mean, all sorts of apps, tipping apps. A lot of people like OnlyFans. I can see it being
OnlyFans on the blockchain. Well, I guess time will tell, mate. So ZK Sync era on the mainnet now. Anybody out there, I would encourage you to go have a go, figure out how to do this bridging stuff if you haven't done it before, because the opportunity for these airdrops is huge. There's thousands of dollars potential. I know plenty of people got thousands of dollars from the Arbitrum airdrop. So get out there, have a play around with it with small amounts of money, and learn about the layer 2 technology.
100%, Simon. A massively interesting space to watch and see. I'm as excited as you are.
All right, mate. Thanks for your time.
All right. Until next time, Simon.